Will you all pray with me? Come, Spirit, come. Fall fresh upon us as we hear these ancient stories and listen for their call in our times. And guide us in our wrestlings of the biggest questions, O God, and help us to know you are here. Amen. So friends, today we keep diving into our series focused on the topic of outsiders and on God's special concern for those on the fringes of society. And we do this work in order to continue to develop a more Christ-like compassion for and engagement with marginalized groups in our community and beyond. And today we do that work with Luke's parable of the table and the feast and the story of the baptism of the eunuch. Now, both of these stories share a commonality in that they emphasize the importance of the welcome that must be made to those on the margins, to the outcasts and to the outsiders. Now, this is not surprising for Luke. His gospel is the most enthusiastic champion for welcoming the outsider. And throughout his gospel and the book of Acts, which he wrote as well, he shows over and over again how Jesus and his earliest followers made a point of including those who typically were treated as outsiders by the religious, social, and cultural establishments of the days. The poor, women, common laborers like shepherds, and the radically different like Samaritans and the eunuchs. So, let's start with the parable about the table and the feast. In Luke's gospel, Jesus practiced radical table fellowship. That meant that he ate and he drank with folks that others had rejected and cast out. Everyone was welcome at his table. And Jesus practiced this table fellowship with all kinds of different people, including those considered as unclean and outsiders, like tax collectors, women, Gentiles, and poor people. And that was a really critical part of Jesus' life and ministry. And it meant that he broke all sorts of rules of class and religion. No one was turned away. Everyone was welcome at Jesus' table, especially the outsiders. And in reaching out to people that others had deemed sinners, Jesus broke down barriers and offered fellowship. And that was so very important because in Jesus' time, meals weren't simply about people meeting physical needs for food. The sharing of meals symbolized friendship and connection. If you were at somebody's table, that meant you were an integral part of somebody's community. You mattered. And Jesus demonstrated that over and over with the stories he told about feasts and the meals that he hosted. The outsiders were the honored guests. And Jesus made sure there was always a special place for those who were left out. Jesus had a special place not only at his table, but in his heart for the outcast and the outsider. And Luke carries this theme of welcoming the outsider forward in the story of Acts and the baptism of the Ethiopian eunuch. And I'm going to stop right there and unpack all of those words because they all deeply, deeply matter to this story. Now, first off, this is the story of the very first baptism of a non-Jew, a Gentile, in the post-Jesus world. Now, second, very critical point here is that this person was from Ethiopia. Ethiopia was the Roman way of referring to all lands south of Egypt. And the word Ethiopian in Greek literally means burnt face or blackness. So not only do we have the story of the first non-Jew being baptized here, but we also have the first person identified as black in the New Testament. Now, the third really critical point we learn about this individual is that they were a eunuch. Now, that term typically referred to boys who were castrated at a young age. And because of their features tending to be more feminine, with having beardless faces, which was very unusual at that time, eunuchs were seen by Roman culture as being soft and effeminate, which means that eunuchs were basically seen as the sexual minorities of the ancient world. So in this story, Luke's key player is a triple outsider. And the experience that this black, non-Jewish sexual minority has in this story is going to show us something pretty remarkable about how the early church viewed outsiders. Okay, so back to the story. Our Ethiopian eunuch was on the road and they encounter Philip, who was there because an angel told him to travel on that road. Now, Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch have a really nice biblical nerd discussion. And then something really remarkable happens. Our Ethiopian eunuch saw some water on the side of the road and wanted to know what was preventing them from being baptized right then and there. Our Ethiopian eunuch did not say to Philip, "Hey, I know that because I am so very different from everyone in your community and I'm an outsider, there may be some hesitancy about baptizing me and fully accepting me as one of you all." They did not say that. Our Ethiopian eunuch did not say, "Would you mind taking this back to your leadership and having several conference meetings where you debate my belovedness and vote on whether or not you all think I should be baptized and be allowed to be a part of your community?" They did not say that. Instead, our Ethiopian eunuch saw the water and realized there was nothing to stop them from being baptized. Essentially, this beautiful outsider says to Philip, "I'm blessed. I'm beloved. I'm a child of God just as I am, so baptize me." And right then and there, recognizing their belovedness, Philip baptized them. He doesn't hesitate. Philip baptized the outsider, the black sexual minority who is not a Jew. Philip showed no concern or hesitancy about the eunuch's gender identity, sexual orientation, faith, or race, perceived or real. Instead, he acknowledged with his actions that there was no reason to prevent the eunuch from being baptized. Philip welcomed them with without question, without conditions, without expectations, and without judgment. So, why does this parable of the feast and who Jesus ate meals with and the story of the Ethiopian eunuch matter? And why do they matter so much right now? Maybe especially as we're going through Pride Month. Well, right now in this country, approximately 1 in 4 trans people live in states that have enacted criminal penalties related to various aspects of trans life. 1 in 4. The number of anti-trans laws passed in the U.S. have increased sharply every year for the past 5 years. There's over 350 laws that have been enacted since 2021. And why does that matter? It matters because in states that have passed restrictive anti-trans laws, the likelihood of a past year suicide attempt among 13 to 17-year-olds who identify as trans or non-binary kids was 72% higher 2 years after passage compared to before the laws existed. 72% higher. And roughly 80% of trans adults report that gender-affirming care bans directly negatively impacted their mental health. And it matters because in the year following the 2024 election, there was a 52% increase in assaults, specifically targeting transgender individuals. 52% increase in assaults. And on a personal level, it matters deeply to me because my non-binary kid recently said to me, even if every problem in my life was fixed, I would still be existing in a country that wants me dead. So again, why? Why does this parable about the feast and who Jesus ate with and the story of the Ethiopian eunuch matter? And why does it matter now? They matter today in our contemporary times because as followers of Christ, we must be committed to developing a more Christ-like compassion for and engagement with those on the outside of our community and beyond. And in our community right now, our trans and non-binary siblings are suffering and they are in danger. They require our witness for their belovedness. They require our sanctuary for their bodies and their hearts. And they require our voices for their rights. Now, have you ever heard this acronym WWJD? What would Jesus do? And it's a popular Christian saying that's intended to serve as a personal reminder to keep Jesus and his example in mind as one goes through life. You can see it on bumper stickers. You can sometimes see it at football. People hold it up on signs, WWJD. But for most of our toughest questions, we do not know what Jesus would do. We can't speak with any authority about how Jesus would respond to our current debates because he didn't say anything specifically about the vast majority of them. So instead of speculating on WWJD, what would Jesus do, it would be way more helpful to focus on something concrete like, what did Jesus do? And maybe what did his earliest followers do in his name? And for that, we can turn to the stories of Jesus in the Gospels and of his earliest followers in Acts to find guidance on an issue such as the care and safety of trans and non-binary individuals. And in particular, we can look to our readings from Luke's gospel today and from his writings in Acts. In both, it is clear that the outsider is intended to be the honored guest, not only at our tables, but in our hearts. In both, it is clear that the outsider is intended to be treasured and beloved, respected, and most of all, welcomed unconditionally in their belovedness. What did Jesus do? What did Jesus' earliest followers do? They welcomed. They accepted. They stood with and for and on behalf of the outsider. They made room at the table and in their communities and in their hearts. They provided sanctuary. May we find the courage to follow their example so that we may boldly accompany the outsider in our midst. May it be so. Amen.